These are a few of the topics that I'm going to cover today: the assessment triangle, accommodations review, knowing the allowable accommodations, the 5th and 8th grade placement meetings for failures on state assessments, also the fact that SPECO needs an accelerated instruction plan for each student who failed a state assessment, and an accelerated instruction plan also has to be in the IEP, and then also the STAR A eligibility forms that have to be renewed every year. And there is a lot of information on the TEA website. At the top right is the address to get to the TEA website. Once there, you'll click on Student Testing and Accountability, and you'll get a drop down, and on the far right of the drop down you've got all the testing accommodations, testing information. I use this all the time. You'll click on Accommodation Resources, and it will take you to the page that has the link for the accommodations triangle, and we'll choose the 2016 accommodations for students with disabilities taking state assessments. And once you click that, you'll see the 2016 triangle, and it'll be for 2017 by the time they get a new one created. But each one of these on the website is a live link to the accommodation descriptions, and for the most part we use type 1. It's very difficult to get type 2 accommodations, and we cannot use type 2 accommodations without TEA approval, and we have very, very few of those. I can count on one hand in all the years I've been doing this the number of accommodations that require approval that we've gotten. Just a reminder, I'm just using the spelling assistance as an example. It gives you a description of the accommodation at the top. This accommodation provides various types of spelling assistance for a student who has a disability that affects spelling, and it'll tell you which assessments it can be used on, but if there's any part of the assessment you can't use it, it will also say that. So for example, STAR Spanish, STAR A, grades 4 and 7 writing, spelling assistance may be used on the written compositions, but spelling assistance may not be used on the multiple choice revising and editing section. And then it goes on to STAR A, English 1, English 2, and English 3. You can use it on the short answer, reading questions, and the written composition, but you cannot use the spelling assistance on the reading section, on the reading selections or multiple choice questions, or the writing section. The spelling assistance may not be used on the multiple choice revising and editing. So there's a lot of information there at when you can hand them their spelling assistance and when you have to take it up. Now, the student eligibility criteria, you have to be able to check all 3 of these. So on this particular accommodation, is the student in special ed or 504? If they're not in special ed or 504, they can't have this accommodation because you can't check the first box. So if you are able to check the first box, do they routinely, independently, and effectively use this accommodation during classroom instruction? If they do, then you can check that box. And then the third box, is this student capable of organizing and developing ideas and understands the basic function and use of written language conventions, and so on. If that fits the student, you can check that. So if you've checked all 3 boxes, the student is eligible for this accommodation. Now, the authority for the decision and required documentation, the first student is special ed. The second bullet there talks about 504 students. The third bullet says in the case of an ELL with a disability. That means ELL students, if they're special ed or 504, can use it. Just an ELL student that's not special ed and is not in 504, they cannot use this. Then, if you're able to check everything that needs to be checked on the front, it's okay, this student so far is still eligible for this accommodation, then you'll turn to the next page, and it tells you the only items that can be used for this accommodation is a frequently misspelled word list, a spell check function on a word processor, a pocket spell checker, a some type of word prediction software, text-to-speech software or devices, or speech-to-text software. That's it. And we actually did have a spelling assistance page that I saw this past school year. On the front, it was a frequently misspelled word list, but on the back, it had synonyms. There is nothing up here that says you can use synonyms, so that was a non-allowable accommodation. So we just took them and we copied the fronts and we left the back blank, and we were able to use that. But they cannot use it on the state assessment if it has synonyms on it. Okay, so what are the special instructions? A student who uses accommodation may complete the test in a separate setting. Yeah, well, this one they really don't have to, because they've just got a sheet of paper. It's not one of those that's going to distract someone else. The use of spelling assistance as a test accommodation should not replace the teaching of spelling skills. So just because we know that they're getting an accommodation of spelling assistance, we still have to teach them spelling. Now, I did say about number one, if you give them just a frequently misspelled word list, no, you don't. They don't have to test in a separate setting. But if they are using something like speech to text or text to speech, they're going to be bothering other people. So yes, depending on which one of the examples they use, they might have to test by themselves. Number three, dictionaries are a required part of the standard test administration procedures and not considered a testing accommodation for some assessments. So some of the assessments do allow a dictionary. If they can have a dictionary, they may not need the spelling assistance. But that's, once you get up into the older grades. If the student needs and then those other special instructions are just specific for if a child needs their responses typed. Oh, and then number 5 basically says they absolutely cannot use a telephone or a cell phone, an iPad, anything that can reach the internet. Okay, so switch gears a little bit. We'll talk about Star A eligibility forms. Every student taking a Star A has to have this eligibility form. Oh, I just noticed there's a spelling error on there. Oh, has to have this eligibility form filled out every year, because the tests that they take change from year to year, and the back of this thing is based on what the teachers that were teaching them that year said. So this Star A eligibility form doesn't just carry forward from year to year. It can't. So when you get ready to, you're talking about kids taking the Star A, you're going to have to be able to check all 3 of these boxes saying that the regular star was considered first. And then the second box, the decision to administer Star A was based on the accommodations the student routinely receives. And what we're saying on the back of this thing is the teachers are going to be doing something that's similar to an embedded accommodation that they get on the test. And then the third says that the decision to administer Star A is based on the eligibility criteria outlined in Step 1 and Step 2. And as a result, the ARD or 504 committee, in conjunction with an LPAC committee, if it's an English language learner, must include this form to show eligibility and document it. All right, Step 1 down here, students must be either special ed or 504 diagnosed with dyslexia to take Star A. So can a 504 kid that's not dyslexic take Star A? No. They have to be special ed or 504 diagnosed with dyslexia. So what if you've got a kid that's dyslexic but they're not in your 504 program? Can they take the test? No, they can't. And in Levelland, if you're dyslexic, you're in 504. We've done that. I don't know what the policy is on the other districts, but you have to be 504 diagnosed with dyslexia to take this test, or special ed. All right, so turning over to the back, the Step 2 is the eligibility criteria. And every student who gets an accommodation on a state assessment, and this has been back as far as I can remember, you have to have used this accommodation at least routinely. Not every day, not every week, but at least routinely enough to know how to use it independently in order to get it on the state assessment. So depending on which test they're taking, you'll find that row. In order for a student to use an accommodation on a state assessment, they must have been using it regularly in class instruction, and at least 2 of the criteria from each tested subject must be checked in order for the student to take the STAR. So if you're sitting in there and let's just say biology, if your student's biology teacher looks across here and says, yeah, nah, no, I'm not doing any of those. Well, for one thing, these are good teaching practices for any student, not just special ed students or 504 students diagnosed with dyslexia. So you're going to have a problem if you've got a teacher that says they're not doing any of that. So these are worded in a way that it's very easy to be able to check a couple of them. So if you can check 2 of these, use of generic and question-specific graphic organizers. Oh yeah, a lot of teachers have charts that they have filled out that students fill in, category charts. I mean, that's a graphic organizer. Identification of formulas to use with specific questions. Well, teachers help the students learn which equations, or which formulas rather, to use with specific questions. So it's very easy for somebody to check 2 things in biology. So again, at least 2 of these criteria from each row that your student, from the tested subject that your student has to be taking, has to be checked in order for the child to take STAR A. So again, biology teachers who says, nope, you can't check any of those, I'm not doing any of that, that kid can't take the STAR A in biology. So, and then this is some information that you'll need to go and get before the ARD. Okay, so Lead Forward, leadforward.com. This is a awesome website that has a lot of resources, a lot of at-a-glance, a lot of things that I print off and then I laminate them and keep them with me. So you would go to leadforward.com and click on resources and then accommodations and assessments. But I'll also tell you, they do have release tests, all kinds of tools to use when you're working through maybe some release tests with students. But anyway, resources and accommodations and assessments. And then you'll see things like testing accommodations, 2016, type 1, type 2, allowable supplemental aids, because there are some things that any student can have. They don't have to be 504 or special ed or ELL. Any student can have these. But the thing is, they still have to have been using it routinely and independently, and it has to be effective. And the test coordinator has to know if you're wanting to use one of these allowable supplemental aids. And then allowable test administration procedures. That's just, and then there's some information about the STAR A. That's just, I go there a lot, and I just wanted to make y'all aware of that. So, to wrap this up, we for sure want to talk about accelerated instruction for any student failing a state assessment. Now, what type of accelerated instruction y'all use that's a local decision, whether it's routine before or after school tutorials, middle of the day tutorials, pull out programs, remediation classes where they're actually scheduled into a class all year that is a remediation class, summer school, pull out programs. That's a local decision, but they do need to be based on student needs. They can include time outside of the regular school day or the regular school year. So, you know, they're talking about before and after school tutorials, and they're also talking about summer school. Accelerated instruction must be specific before the 3rd administration for 5th and 8th graders, and that usually means summer school. So basically, if they fail it the first time, we work with them between the 1st and the 2nd administration, work with them, and if they fail the 2nd administration, the grade placement committee has to meet. If they're special ed students, we need to be having an ARD, because we're either going to ARD them out of the 3rd administration, or we are going to come up with specific accelerated instruction, not just, and that usually means summer school. So then, if they fail the 3rd administration or they're ARDed out of the third administration, SPECO needs to be involved, because you still have to have an accelerated instruction plan for a kid who you've ARDed out because they didn't pass the assessment after the third time. They didn't take it, but they didn't pass it either. So you have to have an ARD. It also applies if the third test administration is waived. Just said that. If it's waived, the student still has to have the accelerated instruction. And then students in grades 5 and 8 who are identified as being at risk for failure on the STAR SSI assessment should receive accelerated instruction throughout the whole year. So if we're talking about our special ed students and we're wanting to for sure show growth with them, we don't know if they can pass it or if they will pass it. They are at risk for failing a state assessment. And those kids we've got identified, we need to have them in some kind of an accelerated program all year. Whether they have tutorials or they're actually scheduled into an EOC remediation class or a reading remediation class or some type of online computer programs. If we think they can't pass it, we need to have them in those classes anyway. So students in 5th or 8th grade who are identified at being at risk for failure on the STAR SSI assessment should receive accelerated instruction throughout the year. Plus, if they're already scheduled into these classes because we're afraid they might not pass it, if they don't pass the test when it rolls around time to take the test, we have to then provide them with further accelerated instruction after each failed assessment. So all special ed students who failed a STAR test must have an accelerated instruction plan with their IEP. And SPECO has to have a copy of these. So if you've got a kid who failed that, and of course we didn't have the third administration this year. So if you've got students who failed that second administration, they need an accelerated instruction plan the next school year. Here in Level N, I do believe that we went ahead and when they canceled the STAR test, we very quickly decided that we were going to do the NWEA, because there is no reason that the teachers should have been here and not have an assessment to show, and the students. We didn't want their summer school to not culminate with something that would show what they learned and how hard they worked over summer. So here we do have the NWEA scores. But again, SPECO's got to have those AIPs. And that is something that needs to be gone through and figured out and gotten done at the beginning of the year. Who needs them? And got to get them to SPECO. Now, there is some guidance for accelerated instruction programs, and it is at this website here. There's also guidance for accelerated instruction programs at texasgateway.org, and that used to be Epsilon. I can't remember what Texas called it now, but they've done away with it. This is my contact information, my email, and my phone number. If you have any questions, and even if you're not from Level N, if you have a question, feel free to email me, feel free to call me.